Right, so today I wanted to talk a little bit about this article out of BNN Bloomberg saying housing bubble worse than led up to the subprime crisis. Bay Street veteran David Rosenberg said he's seeing signs that stress in some of Canada's hottest housing markets is worse than when he first sounded the alarm over the U.S. subprime mortgage crisis nearly 2 decades ago. Rosenberg, the chief economist and strategist at Rosenberg Research, said in a television interview Friday that by almost any metric he watches, financial conditions in Toronto and Vancouver have deteriorated to the point where policymakers should have grave concerns. I'm taking a look at the metrics I had in my hands when I called the housing bubble in '05, '06 in the US. I was looking at to price home price to rent ratios. I was looking at home price to income ratios, and I was looking at the extent which the household sector was overexposed to residential real estate on their balance sheet. He said, I got good news for you. The numbers in Canada on all the metrics are higher now than they were at the peak of the US housing bubble of 13 years ago. Rosenberg repeated warnings over a housing bubble come as a cocktail of record low interest rates and sky high demand for detached homes during the pandemic led real estate prices in Canada's two largest markets sharply higher. The average home price in Toronto was up 15% year over year, hitting 1.045 million, while Vancouver home prices rose nearly 7% over the same time to 1.084. The heat has even spilled over into outlying communities, while Toronto suburbs like Brampton and Oshawa seeing double-digit price gains as buyers further afield in a bid to find more space during work from home restrictions. Um, I'm not going to get into the whole article here, but again, the point is very simple that um, this could be a big thing. Like, I don't know why this isn't talked about more. Um, it's very concerning. Like, it's very concerning that housing prices are very artificially high in these places, even in the average city, right? Like, I mean, maybe a small city, not necessarily, but in any at least six-figure, seven-figure people city, like housing prices are pretty insane, and Toronto and Vancouver are the epitome of that. Um, and again, like he points out too that um, the home price to rent ratios and the home price to income ratios, and that this is the big problem. I think is that the price to income. I mean, let's say you have whatever a $1 million house and you're making $50,000 a year, so whatever, 20 to 1. Now, again, I'm not in the industry, so I'm no expert by any means, but it just takes basic common sense to be able to see this stuff and recognize this stuff, and that if the amount of money people are making on average isn't going up, but housing prices are going up, and not only that, consistently, we're going to be in for some trouble. We're going to be in for a lot of trouble. Now, again, what are the problems like that are causing this stuff? Well, I think there's many things. I mean, the first thing they point out to is number one, artificially low interest rates. I'm not saying we should have them super high, but interest rates are definitely artificially low. Number two, mass immigration has drove up the demand for maybe not the more fancier houses, but again, when you have mass immigration, that'll drive up the demand for the apartments and like the smaller, single family houses or units, and then that'll drive again. It's a pyramid thing, right? And that the the things at the bottom the demand goes up for, which means the things at the next level the demand will go up for, and so on and so forth. So that's a really big problem. And the other really big problem too is that the housing market is heavily regulated, especially in these big cities. I mean, that's one of the main reasons, if not the main reason, why housing prices are so expensive in the Bay Area. And that if you look in the Bay Area, it's borderline impossible to get a like and counterbalance that in large part due to the fact that it's the boomers that own the majority, of at least the highest percentage of these houses, and a lot of these boomers, if the housing prices went down to a reasonable level, they would be in a lot of trouble. So again, I understand there's definitely people that benefit from this, but I don't understand why more people aren't talking about how the younger people are getting completely screwed when it comes to this situation. Like, and the boomers got like insanely lucky, right? They buy these houses for 50 grand, and 30 years later it's worth $1 million. And inflation maybe accounts for maybe 150, 200,000 at the most. So these houses have, two, three, four, three, four, five time 5x over the amount of time. Like if they've gone up 4x, well, that's 400% over 30 years. That's what, 15% a year? Like, that's insane. Like, incomes they barely moved over the last 20 years, right? So this is a really, really big issue. Um, and the worst thing about it's not something politicians are going to touch. And if they do it's usually just more regulations, which in the long run just makes the problem worse. Right? The government will come along and put in rent control, which just guarantees the supply of housing is going to go down over the long run, which is just going to drive the price up at some point. Right? They'll come in and put in more regulations, which again just makes things more expensive, which just makes the price go up. Right? The solution is just allow the free market to operate. Like, for God's sakes, just allow the free market to operate. Now, another very important thing too is that we have to cut immigration, right? And this is the biggest reason I believe that, or not, maybe not the biggest reason, but definitely a big reason to why. Again, like, where do the majority of immigrants want to live in Canada? It's Toronto or Vancouver. Like, what immigrant says, "Oh yeah, I really want to live in rural Saskatchewan"? Like, 1 in 1,000 maybe. Like, maybe a handful of people say, "Yeah, I want to have a farm with some cows in rural Saskatchewan or Alberta," maybe. But again, probably 99% of these people, they want to live in the big cities. No one wants to live in a rural area or a small town. Like, and again, another thing the government does is they say, "Oh yeah, you can immigrate here, but you have to live in a small town," but they only make it for a certain amount of time. So people come, they live in a small town for a little bit, they move in the city. Like, it doesn't fix the problem. So what are the solutions? I believe, again, I'm not in the industry, so I'm sure there's some industry concerns they have, but there's definitely some things that I know beyond a shadow of a doubt would help. Number one, cut regulations. Number two, cut immigration. Number three, just cut out so much of the red tape as well. Like, again, like, does small town Alberta or Saskatchewan, like, where is it harder to get a house built? Is it going to be small town Alberta or Saskatchewan, or is it going to be Toronto or Vancouver? It's going to be Toronto or Vancouver, and it's not even close. So again, we need to cut out so much of the red tape. Right? We have to, again, just allow the market to operate. Now, again, the government's never going to do that, because if the government did do that, housing prices would come down, which would hurt the boomers. Right? So yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of things that can be done. Like, there could definitely be a lot of things that could be done. Uh, Not to mention too, I think we need to come up with a better way. I think the way we currently the banking system operates, I think, is kind of a broken system. But that's a different video in and of itself, and it's kind of archaic, right? It's very archaic. I think we need to deregulate the whole system, right? And that's um, the problem again is that the banking system's also basically a monopoly as well, right? So again, the biggest thing we could do is deregulate, allow the market to operate, cut immigration, um, allow the free market to operate. That's basically the biggest thing. So yeah, I mean, again, the other big problem too is people's incomes, right? That housing prices are consistently going up, but people's incomes aren't. So that is coming up with that is causing a really big problem in that people are ever increasingly relying on debt to live basically, which is one of the big things that caused the US crash, and that the US crash was basically um, lower income, underqualified people that got approved for mortgages that they otherwise shouldn't have got approved for, and they kept getting more and more and more of them until the whole system collapsed, basically. And you know, the Big Short is basically what people think of when they think of the housing crash. But the other big thing too that a lot of people don't talk about is also the government trying to get a lot of underqualified minorities mortgages, which is basically the whole subprime thing. I mean, there was other aspects of it as well, but a lot of it was underqualified Black and Hispanic people. The government wanted to get houses, even though they were underqualified, and they bit off more than they can chew. Right? The financial, I mean, the banksters that rip people off, they deserve a fair share of criticism as well. Like they deserve the majority of the criticism. But one of the big takeaways that people should remember it for as well is that um, the government was trying to get underqualified minorities into houses that they weren't qualified for. I just another failure of diversity in the woke agenda, like kind of an early example of it. So yeah, this is something I would be really concerned about in Canada. But I think that the one thing that the government is good at is kicking the can down the road. So again, I would guess that they're just going to keep kicking the can down the road. The government is going to wait. They're going to just milk every drop they possibly can out of the way that things run, basically. The problem with that, again, is that when we do see a collapse or a recession, it's going to be worse than ever. Because again, this is one of the many reasons why a free market is better than a controlled market or a mixed economy. In that a free market will be more volatile, but a free market, you're never going to see a massive crash, because under a free market the bubble would be allowed to burst when it's a lot smaller than in a mixed economy or a heavily state controlled, government controlled economy. Because again, when the government controls pretty much everything, or when the banking system controls pretty much everything, they can continue to inflate a bubble massively, like massively. But again, in a free market, that wouldn't be allowed, right? Because, and again, it wouldn't be allowed because there's no artificial government monopoly forcing the issue, right? It wouldn't be possible. So yeah, I mean, the solutions to this stuff are pretty. Again, there is no perfect solution to. I mean, that's something people probably they'll find some what if or something. Again, obviously, there's no perfect solution, but continuing to do the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, continuing to inflate a bubble bigger and bigger, it's not going to turn out well, right? So that's basically what I wanted to bring up today. So anyway, if you liked the video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure you check out those links below. Follow me on those other platforms if you haven't already. If you want to donate, you could do that as well. I would very much appreciate whatever support I can get. But at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe and stay tuned for more.